Before we introduce our guests, we've got a couple of housekeeping items. If you have a cell phone in your kilt, please keep it on silent and make sure that you're not standing along any walls or even in the back corner. Please make sure that you scoot in, make a friend, and find a seat. We don't want our fire marshal coming in and shutting us down. So now then, for a woman who has ladies swooning over scots and guys wishing they could speak Gaelic, Diana Gabaldon. You're not boring. That's why you came in. Oh, you can hear me. Okay. All right. How's this? Okay. To distort it. Oh, try that. Okay, great. Anyway, lovely to see you all. It reminds me of when I used to teach. I would walk in the morning and teach human anatomy and physiology. We would have large crowds because it was a real popular science elective. Everybody thought it would be easy. Including the football team. They'd always be seated in the front row, sound asleep, these large inanimate blobs of flesh. Walk in the morning, look at them, nosing there. I'd walk up to the edge of the platform and say, well, this morning, gentlemen, we're going to discuss the history of contraception. And they'd start thinking. In days of old, when nights were bold and condoms not invented, they wrapped old socks around their cocks and babies were prevented. Worked on the football team too. Now, people often say to me, well, how did you get from being a scientist to being a novelist? I say, well, easy, I wrote a book. Fortunately, they don't make you get a license, though having read some books, I kind of think they should. Anyway, no, I had known from a very early age, about 8, I think, when I realized that people actually wrote books. They didn't just pop out of the grocery store shelves like toilet paper. And I realized that was what I was supposed to do. I said, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to write novels. This was the age at which I started reading my way through the Flagstaff Public Library. And I remember taking out Mary Stewart's book, the Moon Spinners book. I was, I think, 9 at the time. And I would go and take out a huge pile of books. And whenever she came to that one, the librarian would always put it back under her desk. She would let me get it. And because she thought this was too grown up for me. I didn't actually have sex, but people kissed in it. And they spent the night together, even though nothing happened, because one of them had a gunshot wound at the time. Which is why I wanted to read it. I had seen the movie. As they came out, the book must be even better. This makes so often the case. Anyway, I had to have my mother write a note saying that I could read anything in the library that I wanted to, and please give me the Moon Spinners, so she did so with that face. But anyway, that kind of made me wonder what the heck else there was in there that I shouldn't be reading. I started looking around. Anyway, as I say, I realized that I was supposed to be a novelist, but I didn't know how to go about it. You know, it's not a well-marked career path. Anybody who does this kind of rolls their own. It's not like you can take so many courses and get certified and then okay, you're a novelist. Not like being a lawyer or a CPA or something like that. What you have to do is write a book, and then you have to get someone interested in publishing it, and then all kinds of other things start to happen. But these are the first things that start to happen. So let's start with the first one, writing a book. I came from a very conservative family background. And my father, he was a state senator for many years. Some of the older people know, they remember him. And for the younger people who are going to NAU, because there's a dormitory there named Gabaldon Hall, which is named after him. I see we have a few occupants. Yeah, anyway, he was a very conservative man. He was born in 1930, grew up during the Depression, and, to him, you got a career, you got a pension and health benefits, and, after you retired, then you could think about doing something that you thought was fun. But knowing this at the tender age of 8, I didn't think I would announce that I wanted to write novels, since I knew this was kind of financially iffy. And so I went to science. I liked science. I was good at it. I enjoyed teaching a lot, but I knew I was supposed to write novels. And so I said, well, maybe later, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. But I hadn't gotten around to anything. And finally, when I turned 35, I said to myself, well, Mozart was dead at 36. Maybe you better get a move on here. Galvanizing idea. And so I said, all right, on my next birthday, I will begin writing a novel. I said, I'm not going to show it to anyone. It's not for publication. I just need to learn how to write a novel. As up to this point, I had written a lot of things. You have to write a lot of things in order to get a PhD in quantitative behavioral ecology. My dissertation was entitled Nest Site Selection in the Pinyon Jay, Gymnorhinus cyanocephalus. Or, as my husband says, why birds build nests where they do, and who cares anyway? And once I've gotten a PhD and a job in academia, then you continue to write all kinds of things, mostly in the order of grant proposals and annual reports and scholarly journal articles and things like that. The point is, these do contain words. And so I did have a really good grasp of the nuts and bolts of writing. I knew what grammar was, I knew what punctuation was. Having grown up in the days when they still taught sentence diagramming in schools, I actually knew what parts of speech were and what to do with them. The TV people sent me scripts and things to comment on, and invariably half of my comments say, it's lie, not lay. No, it's lay, not lie. At the bottom it says, would you really like me to explain the difference between intransitive and an intransitive verb? Because I'd be happy to do that. Anyway, well, I can't say I've given up because it's just a reflex. I can't stand that. But I'm not going to change them, I accept that. Anyway, the point is that I actually was a writer, and I had written a lot of stuff. Well, also, my father would say to me, you're such a poor judge of character, you're bound to marry some bum, he said. So be sure you get a good education so you can support your family. What's going on at home, as I say. As it is, I didn't marry a bum. I married a very nice man, whom I still have 43 years later. But he did quit work 3 months after our first child was born in order to start his own business. And I do have to say that there's not much to choose between an entrepreneur and about financial stability. So, for several years while his business got going and we kept having children, I was the sole support of the family. And they don't pay assistant research professors that much. So I was faced with the problem of making additional money without leaving home, which left me with limited prospects. It was either take up prostitution in the garage, write things, and, Catholic and all that. I said, well, okay, we'll write something to start with. And so I started writing for the computer press. I had accidentally slid sideways in my academic career and become an expert in scientific computation. It's really easy to be an expert if there's only 6 people in the world who do what you do. But actually what happened was that my husband got offered a good job in Arizona. We were living in Los Angeles at the time. And I said, well, if I can find a job, we'll move. So I went and interviewed for this position, and they said, well, yes, we'd love to have you. It's soft money, which means it's renewed by the legislature every year. I said, if we don't use this money, the legislature will take it away again, so you're hired. I said, we don't actually have anything for you to do, so would you design your own research program? And while you're doing it, maybe you could help Bob here, the assistant director, with his research. I said, Bob has 10 years worth of research in cartons in his back room, and you have a computer background, by which they meant I had 1 class in Fortran programming. That's 1 class more than any of them had. They said, so perhaps you could help Bob get his data into the computer. This was the early 1980s, what were called microcomputers, were just barely beginning to seep into academia, let alone offices. And they still thought you unscrewed the top and poured the data in and you got reports out of the top. So I said, okay, it was a job. And so I spent the next 18 months of my life writing Fortran programs to analyze the contents of bird gizzards. That's what I did. This resulted in an 800-page monograph entitled The Dietary Habits of the Birds of the Colorado River Valley, which I'm sure you can find in your local library. And you'll see sort of a progression here, a 400-page thesis, the 800-page monograph. There's a reason why I write very long books. It's because I like digressions. And returning from that. Anyway, coming back to the idea of writing, as I say, I had written all of these things, software reviews and textbooks and exams and papers and scholarly papers and popular science things, and even Walt Disney comic books, and no one had ever shown me how to write any of this stuff. I had just looked at a few examples and written one, and if it didn't look quite right, I poked it till it did. And I said, okay, you've been reading novels for 30-odd years. Surely if you write one, you will recognize it. Write a novel. Okay, so the next question was, what kind of novel shall I write? Because I read everything and lots of it. And I was thinking, well, I read maybe more mysteries than anything else. Perhaps I should write a mystery. And I said, no, mysteries have plots. I'm not sure I can do that. All right, what's the easiest thing I could write for practice? No point making it hard. Asking around looking for an idea, and I said, well, perhaps for me, historical fiction. Because I was a research professor. I knew my way around the library. Said it seems easier to look things up than to make them up. And if I turn out to have an imagination, I can steal things from the historical record. Actually works pretty well. So I said, fine, historical novel, next question, where shall I set this? Because I've got no background in history, just the 6 hours of Western civilization they make you take as an undergrad. So one kind would do as well as another, I'd have to look it all up anyway. So I was thinking, what sounds good? Venice, 18th century, American Civil War, Italian Renaissance. And in this malleable frame of mind, I happened to see a really old Doctor Who rerun on public television. And fortunately, in this crowd, I don't need to stop and explain who Doctor Who is. And this was one of the old Second Doctor episodes, Patrick Trout, in which the Doctor had picked up a companion from Scotland in 1745. This was a young man, 18, 19, who appeared in his kilt. And I was watching that and said, well, that's kind of fetching. I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church. And I said, you want to write a book, it doesn't really matter where you said it. The important thing is get started. So I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. So that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters. Nothing but the rather vague image conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt. Which is, of course, a very powerful and compelling image, as all the ladies will attest. In fact, there's another digression for you. My 6th book, Breath of Snow and Ashes, was a very lucky one for me. It opened at #1 on the bestseller lists of 4 countries at once, and it also won me not only a Quill Award, which was particularly gratifying because I beat Stephen King and George R.R. Martin. That had nothing to do with kilts, alas. It also won me a German award, the Carina International Prize for Fiction, which is very cool. And I got to go to Germany to accept this award. Well, while I was there, the German publisher took advantage of my presence to have me interviewed by everyone in the German press, from the tabloid newspapers up to their equivalent of Vanity Fair. Every half hour for a whole week, I was being interviewed by these people. Who spoke varying kinds of English, so I don't know what most of the interviews came out like. But I was speaking at the end of it to a very bilingual man, very fluent, from a literary magazine, and he was saying, well, I've read all of your books, in the original English, and your narrative force is tremendous. Your characters are so three-dimensional. Your imagery is just transcendental. And I'm thinking, yes, go on. Instead, he paused and said, there is just this one thing I wonder. Could you explain to me, what is the appeal of a man in a kilt? Well, he was German and a man. And I was really tired, or I might not have said it, but I just looked at him for a minute and I said, well, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute. If you guys were wondering, that's actually it. Anyway, 3 weeks later, I'm at home and I get this pile of of press clippings from this little junket. And that particular interview was on top. I recognized the man's name. I read German, but very slowly, but the German publisher had put a post-it note on it. She said, "I don't know what you told this man, but I think he is in love with you." And influence people. So it all began with the man in a kilt. And so I went immediately the next day to the library to begin looking up Scotland in the 18th century. The only thing I knew for sure about writing novels was that they should have conflict. So I was looking for conflict in Scotland in the 18th century. You don't do that for very long without running into Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobites. And I said, yeah, it looks like plenty of conflict. Fine, we'll use that. And I said, now, of course, I must have a lot of Scotsmen because of the guilt factor. But I think I should have a female character to play off these guys. They want sexual tension, that's good. I said, from my cursory research here, it looks as though it's the Scots versus the English. If I make her an English woman, we will have lots of conflict. So about the third day of writing, I was doing the writing along with the research because I said, the point is not to learn everything about Scotland in the 18th century. The point is to learn how to write a novel. So I will begin the writing immediately and do the research as we go along. If I write something and later discover that it's wrong, I'll change it. Just words on the page, no problem. And so that's what I was doing. As I say, about the third day of writing, I introduced this English woman. I had no idea who she was, what she was doing there, or how she would fit into the plot, but I whisked her into a cottage full of Scotsmen to see what she'd do. She walked in, and they're all crouched around the hearth muttering at each other. I turned around and stared at her. I'm thinking, why? Does she look funny? What's going on here? And one of them blew himself up. He said, Mr. Mackenzie, who may you be? And without my stopping to think, I just typed, my name's Claire Elizabeth Beecham, and who the hell are you? You don't sound at all like an 18th century person. So I said, I tried to beat her into shape and make her talk like an 18th century person, but she wasn't having any. She just kept making smart-ass modern remarks. She also took over and started telling the story herself. And I said, all right, I'm going to finally go all the way through this book. I said, no one's ever going to see this. It doesn't matter what bizarre thing we do. Go ahead and be modern. I'll figure out how you got there later. So it's all her fault that there's time travel in these books. And here we all are. If there were no time travel, I wouldn't have qualified for Comicon convention. I would say Comicon is a nice, refreshing change from some of the conventions and gatherings that I do. Not only because of the entertaining surroundings and the pleasantness of everyone involved, but because when I'm crossing the exhibition floor, half the time it's someone who says very respectfully, oh, I'm such a fan, would you mind signing a book? Which I say yes. But the other half of the time they say, oh my God, you're Sam Sykes' mother. Yes, Sam is actually on the program committee, which is why I'm here. Anyway, what was I saying? As I say, I like digressions, but there was something about a book. Oh yeah. So anyway, Claire Beecham is why there's time travel in these books. So the next question, of course, was where did she come from? Who is she? What is she doing there? And I don't write with a straight line, and I don't write with an outline. I write little bits and pieces where I can see things happening. And so I sort of pursued this conversation she was having with the Scots in the cottage and so forth, with them wondering who the heck she was and me wondering why they thought she looked funny. And then I realized it was because they thought she was dressed in her shift, and I could tell she wasn't because she was a modern person. So plainly she was dressed in her house dress. And that's why they thought she looked odd. Well, obviously, what were they going to make of this? And so I was kind of working along those lines while thinking about who is she, what is she, etc. Well, I knew she was an English woman. And I thought, well, she's a time traveler. If I were going to travel in time, what kind of skills would I like to have when I arrived? And I thought, well, I'd like to be something in the medical line that would improve my chances of survival, I think, and keeping other people alive whom I might care about. So I said, okay, is she a doctor perhaps? And I'm thinking about that. I was thinking, no, I don't think so. Not only did she not strike me that way, but the thing about 20th and 21st century medicine is that it's increasingly technological, as any of you who have been in for tests lately can well certainly know. And I said, the thing is, it changes all the time. What was new this year is going to be old next year, there'll be something else. I don't want the book to be dated that quickly. If I portray her as a doctor in the 90s, I began writing Outlander in 1988, then, people won't be reading it anymore by 2000 because things will have changed so much. They'll be going, what's this old fashion? And so forth. And so she didn't come from our time. She came from sometime previous to that. And I was thinking, well, I want her to be empathetic with the audience to the point that we share her idea of, modern medicine, which means, she recognizes germs, she knows about germ theory. And a little thought about that, as I say, I used to teach human anatomy and physiology, which is what gave me Claire's broad but shallow grasp of clinical medicine. But it also told me a fair amount about the history of medicine and so forth. And I happen to know that the three pillars of modern medicine are antibiotics, which is germ theory and what kills germs, anesthesia, putting people to sleep so they don't scream while you're cutting on them, and what's the other one? Oh, antisepsis, which is scrubbing your hands before you touch them, that sort of thing. So those three things are something that a modern person would automatically know and identify with. Said so, she has to have come on the scene some